Gatchaman!
Dealing with the theme of a hero or what makes a hero in media has never failed to produce an eye-rolling effect within me, as it immediately gives a childish, naive demeanor with often overstated and obvious viewpoints. Recent shows such as My Hero Academia convey this and how they deal with this topic by resorting to tropes and a simple good versus evil distinction. Gatchaman Crowds, however, rises above this by delegating each character to different viewpoints and how best to handle the Gatchaman abilities and the future development of humanity. Yet, it does not designate any of them as evil for quote-unquote having the wrong viewpoint. We are greeted in the first season by the dynamic of the Idealist, the Pessimist, and the Übermensch, or Overman. The first two stand in opposition with each other, within Rui and Katse, while Hajime differs from both yet does not reproach either of them, instead even regarding the two playfully. All of the characters within both seasons want to do good but on different terms and with separate goalposts, based on how they interpret how humanity ought to be, disregarding Katse of course. However, even can only attain the desired goal of Earth's destruction according to an interpretation of human nature and how to best bring it out. When we first meet Hajime, she is expressing her abnormal interest in notebooks by herself, which is a simple show of her individualism that differentiates herself from her classmates. Later, her introduction and subsequent effect on the long-standing dynamic of the Gatchaman may come off as another manifestation of such an odd eccentricity, but in reality becomes the prime factor pushing the crew forward. Immediately upon her induction into the Gatchaman team, she steps over the insipid convention set up by the group and in doing so, breaks the status quo. She resolves the issue of the mess which had been the Gatchaman's primary enemies by instead befriending them, gets close to JJ during meetings, reveals her identity to Rui and publicly announces the existence of the Gatchaman. All of this was considered an unthinkable taboo by Paimon and Sugane. Yet as she accomplishes success from these actions, it first baffles them, but then makes them realize just how well Hajime elucidated their faults with such simple actions. She becomes a lawbreaker who breaks their table of values, and through this, she is the creator. This also breaks the common trope seen in most superhero and tokusatsu media, where they must hide their identity from the public, which plays into the more political meaning of transparency seen later. Enter Rui himself and his plan revolving around the popular app Galax. We see a small piece of his vision illustrated in the milk incident, where through cooperation facilitated by the Galaxat manages to deal with the issue quickly. He then later illuminates us on the subject in his conversation with one of the hundreds.
それが手柄ですか。あなたは誰かに褒められたいんですか。名誉が欲しいんですか。
俺だけじゃない。みんなそう思っている。
そうでしょうか。私はヒーローにもリーダーにも興味がありません。そんなものがもてはやされる世界はまだ未熟です。ヒーローでもリーダーでもない。一人一人の人間が意識を変えて立ち上がらなければ、世界は永遠にアップデートできない。心の底から湧き出る喜びです。金や名誉、地位や報酬など外発的なもののためではなく、同じ志を持つ誰かとつながり、困った人に手を差し伸べ、その手を取り合い、共に間違ったことを正していく。本来人間が持つ内発的な喜び。手柄？ヒーロー？私はそんなちっぽけなもののためにキャラクスを作ったんじゃない！
Rui adheres to a philosophy where humans are linked together by compassion and a sense of altruism, and that his Galax app can encourage said behavior to manifest itself into mutual aid. Umeda, the 100 leader he speaks to, chides him out for being too impractical and utopian, especially since Rui is constantly forced to use the power of the hundreds which exist outside the bounds of his ideal to make up for the gaps that his mutual aid cannot cover, as is seen with the helicopter crash incident and the tunnel evacuation. It is after this where the clashing of philosophies between Hajime and Rui come to fruition. Due to Rui's ideal, he wishes to remove the need for the Gatchaman to exist, as his goal requires there to be no sense of hierarchy. Hajime disagrees immediately both on principle and in a few sentences points out Rui's contradictions. Immediately, she brings up the 100 she saw being used by Rui to fix the crisis in the tunnel. She then says,
ロード君、すっぴんの方が綺麗っすよ。こんなに綺麗なのに惜しいんすよね。ロード君ならもっと綺麗になれると思うんすけど、間違いないっすよ。
which seems random and just another eccentricity, but is her putting attention to Rui's lack of transparency. Particularly that Rui shrouds his identity in load from Galax users including them, with it manifesting in him specifically doing so in his greeting of the Gatchaman team. We later see him shedding this act when he greets them casually in later episodes, and takes part in the livestream apologizing to Galax users as Rui instead of Load. Soon after this meeting, Rui sets out to stop the one who stands opposed to his principles, Berg Katse, representing pessimism, who sees the worst in humans and their nature contrasted to Rui. Yet, it is Berg who gave Rui the capability to use the hundreds, and it is the same person that Rui is unable to overcome. His inability to overcome Berg in strength and also signals his incongruency in confronting Berg's philosophy. Rui cannot come to grips with having to rely on a hypocritical usage of the hundreds to make his utopian world, while also not being enough to deal with Berg and his pessimism. It is exactly Rui's idealism that alienates the people using the power of the hundreds and later leads them into the hands of Berg Katse, who ably manipulates them freely. Once Rui falls into the hand of the Gatchaman crew, he starts to come to terms with the previously stated contradictions. Upon his joining, the Gatchaman immediately hatch a plan to show full openness with the people they aim to protect, where Rui takes into criticism of his position and handling in order to encourage viewers to not fall for Berg's nihilistic revolution in order to gain a false sense of power. This is the conclusion of Hajame's insistence to have Rui create transparency in his position and intentions. Afterwards, Hajime, with the support of the Gatchaman crew, confronts JJ to tell him that they will resolve issues on their own, showing that with their potential humanity can save itself against people such as Berg independently, as Berg himself is an entity that uses the nature of humans in order to exert its downfall. All of this represents the various ideologies that go into wishing to change the stagnant status quo. Rui wishes to utilize the direct ability of the people in the hundreds to foster change from the bottom up, to create their own system, a sort of libertarian municipalism. Those who disfavor the bureaucratic system for its impotency, along with the inability of idealists like Rui to achieve their goals, have become disillusioned and only shoot for nihilistic revolutionary actions, such as sticking to Berg's plan of bombing key government facilities and to kill the Prime Minister. The Gatchaman crew wish to implement a better system through more productive means to the situation, with Hajime stimulating the Prime Minister to become a more honest and transparent person, instead of being stuck in the mud like the system he's put in charge of. A scene that may seem at first unusual within the matrix of the show is when Hajime and Berg have their first interactions with each other, where Hajime has fun talking to Berg. This is quite in line with Hajime's character and transparency, as he treats all with equity no matter their strength or position. In particular, there is the final interaction in episode 12 where Berg is teasing Hajime with the destruction of the city, yet Hajime rebukes him by inviting Berg on a date once it is all over and ensures that he will not be killed by the Gatchaman. This is not out of a simple courtesy to save all lives, but because Berg is something that is to be overcome, rather than simply erased. Berg is a representation of the pessimism and senseless nihilism of humans, especially in the situation that the people of the city are greeted with, where just as it is self-defeating, it is also endless until all life has been ceased. This is easily illustrated in the fact that Berg is a being who has destroyed multiple worlds in the past with his methods, including ODs. Instead of simply killing Berg and being done with it, Hajime fuses with Berg, which seals him away. This may be compared to an excerpt from the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where the titular Zarathustra, a depiction of the idea of the Overman, confronts the soothsayer, who represents the notion of pessimism. The soothsayer recites his speech, detailing how the people have harvested, but their fruits have become rotten and brown. Their labor fails in vain, their wine poisoned, fountains dried, fires fall upon them. Seas recede so there is none to drown themselves in, and though the ground gapes, the depth will not swallow. No one wants to live, that they have become too weary for dying, was his divination. This soothsayer was a rendition of Schopenhauer and his philosophy of pessimism, which asserted that non-existence was preferable to existence. Those that follow Berg have given up hope in their current institutions, that they have previously laboured for and instead wish to produce destruction as a retributive process, caring not for what happens as a result or what comes after. During their interaction, the city is now in turmoil thanks to these now nihilistic revolutionaries, that Berg is primed from the populace, and here he attempts to tempt Hajime into falling into his pessimism regarding human nature when confronted with this environment. Similarly, this soothsayer puts forth his philosophies of a dejected people among a world of chaos and hopelessness, which causes Zarathustra to momentarily stumble and grieve for a time, until he later awakens and understands everything. Though Hajime does not falter to see him, she does approach the soothsayer Berg as Zarathustra eventually does, where he proclaims that the soothsayer shall eat and drink at this side, and through the life that he lives, he will show the soothsayer a sea which he can drown himself in, where the soothsayer is being taken under his wing so that he will show him a higher form of life. Just as Zarathustra invites the soothsayer to eat and drink at his side, an allusion to how Nietzsche took in Schopenhauer as a philosophical influence, while seeing his faults that must be overcome. Hajime does the same by inviting Berg to a date. In the director's cut of episode 12, she fuses Berg into herself, sealing away his powers by overcoming his ideas, and keeping him in her pocket so that he may observe his own folly through Hajime's joyful life. Hajime exhibits a high amount of optimism to counter Berg's pessimism, as is the Overman to do. Instead of viewing life and existence as something to be enjoyed and cherished, we may also briefly take the time to summarize the origin into Berg's abilities. The full name Berg Katze means mountain cat in German. There is a famous Japanese yokai known as the Nekomata, a cat spirit which lives in the mountains and looks down upon humans. They are said to have the abilities to shapeshift into humans and beguile others this way. All of this is seen with Berg and may also point to his pessimism, showing it as the anti-human ideal that the Overman is to see it as, along with Berg himself being, you know, an alien. After Berg is dealt with, we are led into the second season. The events that transpired in the first have reaped their effect, particularly in the Isle of Rui's ambitions. The power of the crowds now lies in the hand of all people rather than being confined to just Rui himself. This in particular is an uneasy situation, as a group known as Vape uses the crowds in order to wreak havoc upon the city. This Vape organization is no mere villainous foil, but a revolutionary group opposed to the promulgation of crowds and particularly Rui's intentions in spreading the technology to the masses, or quote-unquote apes, as Suzuki calls them. Rui adheres to the belief that within all having access to the crowds, it will encourage further cooperation among the people. Suzuki exploits this hope in the people in order to expose Rui's folly. Controlling the area of violence within the crowds is a measured tip to pop Rui's bubble of ideals. It is for this reason he never used the Gatchaman ability gifted by him by Berg until then. According to him, all people won't simply work together, especially when bestowed such an ability, and to force it otherwise will be unnatural, as we will see later. It is here where the new lines of philosophy are drawn. Suzuki plays the part of the elitist, believing the power must rest in composed individuals who wield their authority for the best of the populace, aka himself and the Gatchaman taking action when needed and keeping their facilities to themselves. Joe mirrors these notions, seeing the havoc that can be caused by those with such power that don't fall into Rui's utopian vision. However, instead of achieving these goals through snuffing out the issue through violence like Suzuki does, he exploits his position to do it through manipulation of democratic vote. Though it is important to note that it is still Suzuki who first maximized negative reaction to the usage of crowds, and everything afterwards came as a cascade in reaction to it. In Rui and Suzuki's confrontation, we have two men with principles that cannot be compromised. Just as Rui is willing to die for his own, Suzuki is willing to kill. Hajime's take on the issue is summed up in one scene.
悲しいな。僕が思っていた以上にこの星はみんながバラバラです。一つになれば争いもなくなるのに。
そんなに争いってダメっすかね。
何言ってるんですか先輩。ダメに決まってるじゃないですか。
必要な時もあるんじゃないですか。
それって人を傷つけていいってことですか。
そうじゃないっすけど、バラバラだからこそバチバチってなってキラキラってなるんすよ。
よくわかんないんですけど。
Hajime states quite simply that conflict breeds evolution. Attempts to remove conflict entirely seizes evolution and causes stagnation. The inverse of this can be seen in Galsadra, who sets out to erase conflict entirely by collectivizing human society through the e-democracy Rui has put in place. There is a reason Berg states that he was in fear of Galsadra's power, And this is because of Zhao's uncanny ability to manipulate the population on a level greater than Berg's. Whereas Berg did it out of his own malice and for entertainment's sake, Gelsadra genuinely believes the drivel that they purport and unknowingly leads their followers to their doom. Removing public usage of the crowds limits the ability to produce evolution within Ru's e-democracy system by heavily restraining the power of the people, reinstating the previous monopoly on violence. It is through Gelsadra's methods and popularity that the people are herded and more, restricting the ability of the individuals to voice their own opinion and for the collective to rule absolutely under Gelsadra's reign. To quote Gasset, the mass is all which sets no value in itself, good or ill, based on specific rounds, but which feels itself just like everything. The mass crushes beneath it everything which is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified and select. Anybody who's not like everybody, who does not think like everybody, runs the risk of being eliminated. We see this illustrated in the Kusamas, who rise out of people in the collective and proceed to weed out all those who do not integrate themselves with prevailing social narrative. People who fall under its jurisdiction and do not accept the embrace of the Kusamas by forcefully pacifying their individualism for the sake of their supposed peace and order are outright purged. This may come as a contradiction. Why would an ideal dedicated to removing conflict and establishing true equality, where all are the same and in peace and harmony, resort to utilizing violence and fear? The truth is that it's not a contradiction at all, and must come entailed if one is to believe that such an ideal is even achievable. Gelsadra tells it straight, that these actions fall in line with wanting all humans to come to a singular consensus, making it completely justified under his purview, with the support of the profusion of the followers to boot. Later comes the penultimate scene, which I believe to perfectly encapsulate the distinctions between characters and their respective alignments. When Rui is subsumed by the Kusamas at his residence, his AI assistant X has Suzuki confront him. Upon seeing Rui in such a pathetic state, Suzuki responds with thus.
ずいぶんふぬけたものだな。
いやあ、鈴木リズムか。
猿になった気分はどうだ？
とてもいい気持ちなんだ。どうして僕は今まで一人で頑張ってたんだろう。一つになるのはこんなに素晴らしいことだったのに。
そうか、おめでとう。二宮瑠衣のアップデートはどうやらここで終わりのようだな。君はつまらない人間になった。
In embracing the docility put onto him by the Kusamas for convenient comfort, Rui has forfeited his ideals that once defined him, thus losing his identity. It shows that Rui's subscribed ideologies make him very susceptible to Gelsadra's platitudes and the mass social movement he has sprung, even if he plays reluctant at first. In the past, Suzuki, though he disagreed with him and thought his ideals to be naive and self-destructive, at the very least respected him for those ideals, and was equally as dutiful in killing him as he persisted on such ideals. But now he is simply a boring person, as they'll become when stripped of their individualism under Gelsadra's vision for the world. Suzuki is a very important character despite his minimal amount of appearances, for he is essentially a terrorist, yet he is never demonized, rather treated just as Hajime treats everyone. There is a large difference between him and Berg, however, for he still acts as for what he sees as good, and is really no less of a quote-unquote hero than anyone from the Gatchaman crew, as he was simply forced to play his part in the show as according to his principles. In the end, we see him freely leave and go back into the crowds after his work is done and the world is denied death once more. So, if neither the vision of Rui nor Gelsadra will pan out for the utopian fashion they wish for, then who are we to endorse? Suzuki and Joe's elitism? Wouldn't that align with the elitism of Nietzsche in my example of portraying Hajime as a possible example of the Overman? Well, no. Gatchaman Crowds does not offer a conclusion for what the most viable system is, as it sees it as quite unanswerable. There is no utopian system. However, we may aspire to improve the system we find ourselves under through full pluralism. That is, allowing the breadth of opinion to flourish in a maximal way rather than kowtowing the cushy and convenient mass narratives that may pervade. Indeed, the ending of Season 2 challenges everyone to simply sit back and think before exercising one's right to take part in the system. It shows the dangers of how easy it is to fall in line with the mass, but also the threat of resigning rights of the people for the sake of quote-unquote security. That is the quality of Gatchaman crowds. As per its themes, it keeps itself open. The vote on Gilsadra's fate is open to the public with the idea that the voters should be given time to think on it and make their own decision on their own. It's not really about your own interpretation, as it comes to the same conclusion in the end. I phrased Hajime as an Overman, but this is just one way of looking at it, and I thought it to be applicable enough to best explain the themes of the show, as it makes a clearer point of rising above the crowds but not patronizing them for their position, or putting oneself above them in some way. Likewise, Gatchaman Crowds does not seek to impress a particular position or set of ideals in the viewer, but merely greets us to our current lot. You cannot attach yourself to Rui or Suzuki and think that since they serve their role in the story, that they are the quote right ones that we should emulate in ideology. Especially since in the former, Rui kinda serves as a proverbial punching bag across the story for his naivete. Rather, it serves as Hajime, who as per the theme of the show, also does not look towards embossing her own ideal of a system, but just going with the flow, working best with what is giving and treating everyone with equity regardless of their viewpoints. And many of the characters' views are molded by Hajime's sense of transparency in this way. Because of this, the politics of the show are very natural and never once feel preachy. And that's the note where I'd like to end this video. If you like this kind of content and would like to see more, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel for future videos. With that being said, thanks for watching.